President Obama has just announced that the government will not prosecute people who pay ransom to terrorists that have kidnapped their relatives. This change comes after some family members complained they were threatened with prosecution if they pursued ransom as an option. Now, there won't be any formal changes to the law that explicitly prohibits paying money to terror groups. The Justice Department simply won't prosecute it if it happens. But, Jim, that law is in place that says you're not allowed to give money to a terrorist group. This is in violation of that law, right?
So it's also illegal to possess marijuana under federal law, and because states have legalized it, the federal government has decided not to do it. I mean, look, it is a really thorny issue here. I mean, you know, you think about families whose loved ones have been kidnapped. How can you prosecute them? I mean, that's what it is. It's a political pass.
But, Mayo, how much leeway does and should a chief executive, be it a president or a governor, have when it comes to deciding what cases are going to get prosecuted and what cases aren't?
Oh, well, you have it all the way down to your mayors. I mean, you have it at every level of the executive office. You have people who decide, for instance, on the books, adultery is still a crime, and that doesn't get prosecuted. You have a host of things that are still criminal that don't get prosecuted. And it's a discretion of the prosecutor, basically. But in this case, you have the president who's making the determination instead of the attorney general's office. One of the concerns whenever you start to pick and choose what crimes you're going to prosecute is that it makes it more difficult to justify prosecuting other cases, and other people have equally compelling reasons as to why they shouldn't be prosecuted. So, for instance, assisted suicide is illegal, but I'm quite sure you can look at certain circumstances where even if you disagree, you can understand why the other person may have felt it was necessary to do so.
Well, what if there's an arrest in an assisted suicide or in a marijuana case, or in something like this, somebody comes up and arrests somebody? At what point then does that take away the flexibility of that mayor or that governor or that president?
Well, if there's an arrest, now you have a burden of prosecuting, and you have a range of things you can do. You can dismiss in the interest of justice if you choose to. You can have an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. You can have a range of different offers that can be made. But once you make the determination to prosecute, the president cannot tell people that are prosecutors not to prosecute the crime.
Mark, didn't we just have something similar with the president in the immigration executive order that he put into place, where he used that executive order to circumvent immigration law, blocking the deportations? Now, two courts have issued injunctions saying you can't do that while we're deciding the merits of that executive order. But it seems like they're saying you can't do that on immigration, but yeah, go ahead and do that on ransom.
Well, I think with hostage situations, they're inherently ad hoc, and you have to address each one on its own merits. I think it's very difficult to have a bright line or a categorical rule. You have to look at the circumstances and the context. For example, I mean, there's no country tougher on terrorism than Israel. But they'll go to any lengths of the earth. They'll pay bribes, they'll pay ransoms to get their soldiers back. I think everyone would agree that getting back a soldier, an American soldier, is vital, especially in a volunteer army, because nobody is going to sanction their child going off to war if we don't move heaven and earth to get the soldier back. Little bit of a different situation when somebody goes to a dangerous area in the world for tourist purposes, for personal pleasure, or even for commercial purposes as a contractor. Different situation again if it's a journalist, Daniel Pearl, something like that, serving a public need for us. We would want to move heaven and earth to get that person back because he's doing a public service for all of us. So I think this is an area where the executive needs lots of discretion to be able to react to each case as it arises.
Well, does that discretion apply, Jim, as you mentioned, in marijuana cases or in assisted suicide cases? How much leeway? I mean, Congress writes the laws. Going back to 8th grade civics class, the president is charged with enforcing those laws. It seems like it's a fairly selective case of him deciding what he wants to enforce and what he doesn't.
That's exactly what it is.
That's not, but isn't that not the way? That's again back to 8th grade civics. Isn't that not the way this is supposed to work?
Because foreign hostage taking is inherently involving foreign policy matters, and we just had the Jerusalem passport case where the executive's great authority in the foreign policy context was vindicated and upheld by the Supreme Court. Anytime you're negotiating with foreign terrorists, you're right in the executive's bailiwick because it impacts foreign policy considerations, and it also impacts his authority as, at least in the military context, as commander-in-chief. Again, you're not going to get people to go off and fight foreign wars if you don't do everything in your power to get the hostage back.
The difference here, though, is that you're not limiting it to people who are soldiers, or you're saying basically that anyone can do it. And if it was any of us, we'd want to be able to do it as well.
That's true.
However, the reason that you don't negotiate is that there's a school of thought that says by negotiating and paying ransom, you're encouraging it.
Look, it's a political decision. I mean, that's what it is. And you're absolutely right. It's something that you don't expect. You expect when laws are there, they should be enforced, and if they're not going to be enforced, they should be taken off the books. If you're not going to enforce the laws against, marijuana use, then take them off the books and don't have an inconsistent
We talked about
result.
this last week about, taking marijuana. It's a fiction that marijuana has no valid medical use. It should be taken off as a Schedule I banned substance. Why
Absolutely.
they don't do it and they just don't enforce the law, I guess it's Puritanism.
Although
that's
it should
what
be a
is.
control substance, because as a controlled
Yeah,
substance, it doesn't
but
mean
you
its
can
possession
reclassify
per
it.
se
Reclassify.
is illegal, but it's one thing for it to be used for medical purposes. It's another thing for people
Right,
to
but
simply
to
say,
be
I
a
want to just
Schedule
smoke marijuana.
I controlled substance, the criteria is, in part, no accepted medical use. It's just not true.
We
It's false.
started talking about ransom to terrorist groups, and we ended up talking about medical marijuana.
that's
So
where we are.
it's the ups and downs of the legal battle. All right, we'll take
Anyone
a-
who could follow the discussion here needs something heavier than medical.
All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, if you get caught speeding by one of those hidden cameras, can you fight it and win? And should these things even be allowed? Are they constitutional? I've been waiting to ask the legal team this for a long time. Stay with us.